The wind in Barika was no ordinary wind. It whispered through the tall palms and rustled the dry grasses in a way that felt alive, like it listened, and sometimes, if you paid close enough attention, answered back. And there was one girl the wind seemed to love most. Zelina was 17, slender and bright-eyed, her skin the deep brown of river-washed earth, her hair always tangled with bits of leaves because she wandered too much. But it was her voice people remembered. That voice could bring tears to grown men and joy to grieving women. She could mimic the exact cry of a newborn goat, the flutter of wings, or the throb of ceremonial drums. When the elders told folktales around the fire, she needed only one listen to recite them with perfect rhythm, matching the voices, the pauses, the heartbeats. Children would crowd her feet. Birds would go quiet. Even the wind, they said, paused to hear her. But in Barika, that gift was both miracle and danger. The village sat between two rivers, guarded by old laws and older fears. Women could cook, tend, birth, and bury. They could sing lullabies and mourn the dead. But to speak in council, to question a man's truth, or to carry rumors, those were forbidden. Stories were permitted only when passed by the griots, the men chosen to remember. For a girl like Zelina, that meant walking a thin path. She lived with her grandmother, Nanalumo, a blind elder whose eyes had turned cloud-white long before Zelina was born. They shared a thatch roof hut on the edge of the village, near the whispering trees. Nanalumo had once been a voice keeper herself, before the laws hardened. She would sit by the hearth, stringing beads with hands that never missed, and say to her granddaughter, "Your voice is not yours alone, it carries the voices of our ancestors. Speak with care. Speak with courage. Speak only when the wind agrees." Zelina had always taken those words seriously. She never mocked. Never lied. She only used her gift to heal, to teach, to bring laughter where there was sorrow. But even that, in Barika, could be a crime if done too well. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees and painted the river gold, Zelina carried her clay pot to the water's edge. It was the cool hour, when men believed no spirits walked and most stayed indoors. She liked the silence of that time, the rustle of frogs, the far-off clink of beads, the breath of dusk. As she knelt beside the river, she heard voices, low, urgent, wrong. Not fishermen. Not mothers. The voices came from behind the stone shrine across the water, hidden by vines. She froze, her ear tilting like a bird's. The chief's son. The high priest. A plan, whispered, wicked, to poison the next ruler, to shift power through death. Her pot tipped silently into the shallows as the wind brushed her ear, almost warning her. But it was too late. She had heard. And the wind, as always, had heard with her. ChatGPT said. The next morning, Zelina's hands trembled as she ground maize in the courtyard. Her grandmother sat nearby, humming softly, sensing the shift in her granddaughter's breath. "You saw something," Nanalumo murmured without turning her head. "Or heard it. The air around you is restless." Zelina opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. What she had overheard by the river clung to her chest like wet cloth, heavy and suffocating. She hadn't slept. She hadn't told a soul. But she couldn't carry it alone anymore. Later that morning, in a hushed corner between the yam fields and the broken well, Zelina whispered to her closest friend, Aika. Aika was the only one who had ever been allowed to hear Zelina mimic the elders during sacred songs or repeat the drummer's hidden patterns. She had sworn never to repeat anything. But this time was different. "I heard them," Zelina whispered, eyes darting. "The chief's son. The high priest. They're planning to poison the air during the first moon feast." Aika's eyes widened with disbelief. "Zelina, that's madness." "I swear on my voice," she said. Aika nodded. "Then we must tell someone." But before the sun had reached its highest point, the story had already traveled. Aika told her brother, a young drum apprentice eager to prove his worth to the griots. He, in turn, shared it with another, who whispered it to his uncle, a council guard. And by dusk, murmurs rippled through Barika like fire through dry brush. They say Zelina saw spirits conspiring. No, she heard the chief's son confess to the priest. Lies. She's just a girl. Girls imagine things. She speaks like wind, maybe she heard what wasn't there. In the council chamber, word of the tale reached the chief himself. His face, once calm with authority, twisted in rage and fear. She defames my house. My son. That tongue which spreads poison with her lips. His pride would not allow even a hint of such accusations to go unchecked. The high priest, draped in black and gold, took the opportunity with swift, cold precision. She communes with forbidden spirits, Your Majesty. She claims to hear what no one else can, that is no gift. That is possession. The chief's son said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence screamed guilt to anyone who had ears, but no one would dare say it aloud. 2 nights later, before the entire village, Zelina was dragged from her hut. Her grandmother screamed and clawed at the guards, but they pushed her aside like a worn mat. A fire burned in the village square, casting long shadows over the gathered crowd. Zelina stood barefoot on the judgment stone, arms bound behind her, eyes calm but burning. The chief watched from a raised stool, flanked by the high priest and armed guards. A hush fell over the villagers. She has brought shame, the chief declared. She lies in the name of truth. She brings unrest with her words. I did not lie, Zelina said clearly, though her voice trembled. I heard what I heard. The wind heard it too. The high priest stepped forward, holding a long blade with symbols etched into its length, the ceremonial blade of purification, used only in the gravest trials. Then let the wind carry your silence, he said. Let it remember your voice, for you shall not use it again. Zelina turned to the villagers. Will none speak for me? She asked. No one moved. Her grandmother pushed through the crowd, screaming, Stop this madness. Her voice is sacred. But the guards held her back. And then, the blade. They forced her to her knees. Her breath came fast. She looked up at the moon, at the sky, at the wind itself. She did not scream. She did not plead. She only locked eyes with her grandmother, as if to say, Remember me. Even if they silence me, remember me whole. The priest gripped her jaw. Steel flashed. And then, the world went quiet. Zelina collapsed, blood soaking the dust at her knees, lips parted in pain but without a sound. Her body trembled once. Then she was still. The crowd didn't cheer. No one clapped. No justice had been served, only fear. The chief looked pale, the high priest smug, and the wind was completely still. Nanalumo broke free, kneeling beside her granddaughter, cupping her face, her own voice like a knife. You think you've silenced her? Fools. You've given her power you cannot unmake. Her silence will sing louder than your drums. And the wind returned, sudden, fierce, curling through the trees, shaking the huts and rattling the council masks. That night, the people of Barika did not sleep. The drums were silent. The air heavy. And though no one spoke it aloud, they all felt it. The girl with no tongue would not go quietly. They didn't bury her body. That would have made it too sacred. Instead, under the cover of dawn, as dew still clung to the thatched roofs and smoke from breakfast fires curled into the gray morning, the chief's guards lifted Zelina's limp form and carried her to the edge of the silent ravine. It was a place the villagers spoke of only in hushed tones, where condemned souls were tossed like refuse, where the bones of the shamed and the cursed lay scattered like broken promises. No drums were allowed there. No prayers were said. It was a mouth in the earth that swallowed the unwanted. They threw her in. Her body hit the slope, rolled down over rocks and roots, and landed with a thud at the base. Dust rose around her like mourning cloth. She did not cry out, could not. Blood still seeped from the corner of her mouth, drying in thick clots on her chin. For a time, the ravine was quiet. Then, the leaves rustled. A figure moved through the underbrush, barefoot, her presence almost unseen, a shadow with skin like bark and hair knotted with feathers and moss. Nor. Once a great priestess of Barika, she had been cast out decades ago for refusing to speak aloud in ritual, claiming the spirits answered her without words. They called her a danger, a witch of silence, and banished her. But the forest had not abandoned her. She found Zelina's broken body lying in the crook of a twisted root, her pulse thin but alive. The old woman knelt, placing 2 fingers beneath the girl's nose. When she felt breath, faint, slow, she whispered to the air, "So they've sent me another gift." Nor lifted the girl with the strength of memory, cradling her like a mother would a fevered child. She carried her into the folds of the ravine, deeper where light rarely reached, to a small cave ringed with dried herbs and bones. Days passed in a haze. Zelina drifted in and out of fever. She couldn't eat. Couldn't speak. Could barely move. But Nor fed her with honey water and mashed roots, bathed her with bark soap, wrapped her wounds in tree bark and salves, and hummed low, wordless songs as she worked. When Zelina finally opened her eyes and tried to form a word, she winced. Her mouth was ruined. Her tongue a stub. Her voice gone. Nor only smiled softly and tapped her own chest. Then, with slow movements, she beat a rhythm on the ground with 2 fingers. Bada. Bada. A heartbeat. Then a pause. Then bada. Zelina blinked. Nor smiled again and drew a circle in the dirt, a symbol for air, and held her breath dramatically before exhaling and drumming again. She tapped her chest, then Zelina's. Then she placed Zelina's palm against a tree root that pulsed slightly, like it too was breathing. "Speak through breath," Nor signed, her fingers moving like branches in wind. Not all voices come from the mouth. Zelina's recovery was slow, but the cave became her womb. She learned to communicate through gestures, tapping rhythms into wood, sand, and skin. She learned to listen differently, not just with ears, but with her bones. When Nor pounded on a hollow drum carved from a fallen Irako tree, Zelina didn't just hear it. She felt it through her ribs. At night, she dreamed of wind circling her, lifting her hair, whispering in words she didn't fully know but understood. She saw faces in trees. Heard her grandmother's voice through the calls of owls. The forest repeated sounds, a woodpecker echoing the priest's footsteps, a stream murmuring words from the trial. She was no longer just hearing. She was remembering the world. One evening, as Nor painted her skin with ash and coal to mark her survival, Zelina touched the earth with her palm and felt the rhythm beneath it. A vibration. An echo. She tapped it back. The earth answered. And in that moment, something ancient stirred, not in the soil or the wind or even the sky, but inside Zelina herself. They had tried to bury her voice. But down in the darkness, among the forgotten, a new one was being born. ChatGPT said. The drum was unlike anything Zelina had ever seen. Nor led her to it one morning just after the mists had lifted from the ravine. Dew still clung to the moss and vines, and birds sang from the canopy in distant tones. The old priestess knelt before a hollow tree stump, long cracked and coiled with time. Resting atop it was the drum, wide, dark, and carved from the forbidden gamba wood, said to carry the memory of storms and sorrows. This, Nor signed, was not made to entertain. It was carved by grief. Played only by truth. Zelina approached, her fingers hovering over the taut hide. The leather stretched across it was marked with symbols, not words, but flowing lines that looked like wind caught mid-motion. Nor motion for her to sit. Then, slowly, she struck the drum with 2 open palms, not loud, not soft. The sound rolled through the ground like thunder in a deep cave. Nor closed her eyes, lifted her hands, and drummed a new pattern. This time, the rhythm seemed to pull emotion from the very air. A kind of sorrow. Zelina felt it crawl across her chest, up her throat, not pain, not memory, but pure, aching grief. Nor pointed at the drum, then at her heart. This listens, she signed. Only to truth. When Zelina touched it, her hands trembled. The wood pulsed beneath her fingertips. She closed her eyes and let her feelings rise, not words, but shapes, the burn of betrayal, the shame of silence, the memory of the blade, the betrayal in Aika's wide eyes. She struck the drum. Once. Twice. Then in a fast, stuttering rhythm, like a heartbeat panicking beneath the skin. The sound that came out was not beautiful. It was raw. Heavy. Terrifying. And it made Noor weep. Zelina looked up, startled. Noor wiped her cheeks and touched the drum with reverence. Then she kissed Zelina's brow. "You've spoken," she signed. And the forest heard. From then on, Zelina practiced each day. She drummed her pain. Her rage. Her memories. And slowly, her rhythms began to form messages. Not just feeling, meaning. The way she would strike a pattern could say, "They lied to me." The pace and pressure could say, "They made me bleed." A sudden pause, then a soft repeat, "But I lived." The forest learned her voice. So did the wind. Sometimes animals would gather when she played. Once, even a black jackal sat still and silent beneath her tree, listening as she drummed her loneliness into the bark. One afternoon, while they searched for healing roots beyond the ravine, Noor paused. Voices. Whimpers. They followed the sound until they reached a clearing where 3 women sat huddled beneath a collapsed tree. Their clothes were torn, faces bruised, eyes wide with fear. Noor moved first, gently offering water. Zelina crouched nearby and studied their eyes. One was young, maybe 13. Another bore a swollen belly. The third was scarred down one cheek. They had been banished. Left for dead. One had spoken against a man in council. Another had been accused of stealing her own dowry. The youngest had refused a marriage to a man 5 times her age. They had no names now. Only silence. That night, Zelina built a fire and brought out the drum. She didn't smile. She didn't explain. She simply began to play, softly at first, letting the rhythm tell her story, of being punished for a truth, of being cast away, of bleeding into silence, of surviving. And as the beats carried through the trees, the scarred woman began to cry. The girl wrapped her arms around her knees. The pregnant one whispered, "I know this pain. I felt this pain." Zelina looked up. The drum had spoken for her, and they had understood. Noor watched from the shadows and nodded. "Others will come," she said, voice low. "And you will lead them." In the months that followed, they did come, one by one, in twos, in frightened clusters. Women who had been silenced by fear, exiled for honor, discarded like refuse by the same village. Some were too broken to speak. Others were too angry. But Zelina gave them something more powerful than words. She gave them rhythm. She carved small drums and taught them how to beat with breath, to pour feeling into their palms, to turn suffering into sound. Each woman crafted her own pattern, her own message. They shared stories not with tongues, but with beats on stone and wood, sand and skin. When they played together, the forest sang. They called themselves the Echoed, because they were once voices forgotten, but now returned. They built shelters among the ravine roots. Learned Norse herbs and charms. Named each other with drum signatures instead of spoken titles. And when Zelina drummed, they listened. Not just because she led them, but because her silence had more power than any man's speech. She had become their voice, without ever speaking again. And though the world outside still believed she had died in the silent ravine, the truth was far louder. She had been reborn. And her drum was learning to sing. ChatGPT said. It began with a whisper, not from a mouth, but from the sky. Barika prepared for its grandest season, the festival of first harvest, a time when the villagers dressed in dyed raffia, drank sweet palm wine, and sang praises to the gods for rain and crop. Drums filled the air from morning to dusk, rhythms of joy and thanksgiving, but then came a new sound. One night, as the moon bloomed full and the village fires crackled low, a different drum echoed across the trees. It did not match the rhythm of celebration. It came from beyond the far fields, across the river, deep within the forest where no one was meant to dwell. It was slower. Heavier. Not festive, but deliberate, a mournful cadence laced with warning. Bottom. Bottom yeah. Pause. Bottom. A strange hush fell over the crowd gathered near the central bonfire. Even the griots, the official drumkeepers of Barika, stopped playing. The villagers looked at one another. Some laughed nervously, but others stared toward the trees, uneasy. The chief, seated on his woven throne, glanced at the high priest. "That is not one of ours," he muttered. The priest narrowed his eyes. "Perhaps a distant village's echo. Sound travels strangely at night." But then came the second beat. And this time, it told a story. A rhythmic pattern, unmistakable to those who could feel it, like a heartbeat wrapped in truth. It pulsed again and again, and with each repetition, unease deepened. The next morning, one of the elder women stood outside the chief's compound and said softly, "That beat, it spoke of the poison air." The chief's eyes went sharp. Within 2 nights, another drum echoed. This time, the rhythm was faster, like feet running. Then a break. Then a soft, almost inaudible thrum, like weeping. A trader's wife stood at her doorway the next morning and said, "It sang of the girl they cut, the girl with the wind in her voice." The whispers spread like infection. More beats followed over the next weeks, always in the middle of the night, never during festival dances. And always revealing something terrible. One drumbeat told of a barren woman whose land had been seized and given to a councilman's son. Another revealed the lies told during a fire trial, where a girl was blamed for the death of her sick mother. Yet another spoke of sacrificed goats that were replaced with healthy children no one dared search for. Each time the rhythm sounded, someone in the village wept the next morning. Someone collapsed. Someone tried to flee. No words were spoken, but everyone felt it, the truth was waking up. And it had rhythm. The high priest convened a secret meeting, his eyes wild. "They are using sorcery," he hissed. "This is not storytelling, this is an attack." The chief nodded, jaw clenched. "Send scouts. Find whoever plays these drums." But the first group sent into the forest never returned. Days later, only the body of one warrior was found, throat slit, eyes open in terror. Carved into the wood beside his corpse was a symbol, not a word, but a beat mark. A pause between strikes. The forest had answered. Still, the chief sent more. One by one, they vanished. Some came back raving about ghosts. Others came back bleeding, saying they'd heard crying trees or drums that beat from within the earth itself. Finally, a group of 3 returned carrying something more chilling than a body. A torn drum cloth, stained with ashen blood, with one thing stitched in the corner. Zelina. The moment the cloth was unrolled in the council square, the entire village gasped. A girl near the back fainted. A mother screamed. The old ones covered their mouths. "She's dead," someone whispered. "We saw her bleed. We saw them cut her." "But she didn't scream," another said. "Not once." "She doesn't need to now," a third murmured. "She has the forest to scream for her." That night, no one lit fires. No one drummed. Even the chief's son left his bed to pace the palace yard in silence, looking over his shoulder. The chief, now gray with fear, declared martial silence. No one speaks of her. No one listens to the drums. Anyone caught following the sound will be exiled. But it was too late. Children began waking from dreams, saying they heard the girl of wind whispering secrets to them. They drew patterns in the dirt that looked eerily like drum codes. Wives began drumming on cooking pots in strange rhythms. One night, an old woman beat her walking stick on the council steps in perfect cadence, and every elder recognized the pattern, the story of the high priest's false miracles. That morning, the high priest vomited blood. The chief demanded another expedition. This time, he would go himself. "We'll burn the forest," he growled. "We'll silence her forever." But his guards hesitated. They had heard the rhythms too. They had sisters, mothers, daughters who wept at the beats. And so, Barika began to divide. Some begged for protection. Some begged for forgiveness. And others, mostly women, began following the rhythms into the night, into the trees, into the place where silence had once buried a girl and given birth to a storm. The forest was no longer quiet. And the drums were just getting started. It was the night of the river moon, the only night when the villagers of Barika believed truth could be offered directly to the ancestors. Every year, those seeking justice left small totems at the Shrine of Truth, a stone monument at the edge of the sacred riverbank. It was surrounded by whispering trees and guarded by laws older than memory. That was the night Zelina chose to return. Cloaked in charcoal and silence, she crept through the thickets with a hand-carved drum strapped to her back. Around her, the forest exhaled in rhythm, guiding her steps. Her body had grown stronger, lean, powerful, but her presence remained ethereal, like she was walking in the skin of a storm. She approached the shrine as the last villagers departed, leaving their tokens of justice, gourds, bones, tears sealed in calabashes. Zelina knelt before the stone and removed her drum. She placed it gently beside the base of the shrine, pressing her palm to the earth, sending a silent offering. The wind shifted. And then, a sharp sound. Too late, she turned. Torches flared behind her. A ring of spears glinted in the dark. They had been waiting. 6 guards lunged from the shadows, overwhelming her with netting soaked in mud and herbs that dulled the skin. She struggled but did not scream, could not. Instead, her fingers dug into the earth, clutching the soil like a mother might a child. The chief's captain stepped forward and struck her across the head with a blunt end of his staff. "Let's see if the wind will save you now," he sneered. They dragged her back to Barika in chains. By dawn, word had spread. Villagers flooded the square, gasping when they saw her, Zelina, bound, bruised, blood drying on her temple, but upright. Her eyes held no fear, only something far deeper. Recognition. The chief, now visibly aged, stood before the crowd flanked by the high priest, whose robes were stained with palm oil and sweat. "Bring her forward," the chief commanded. They threw her to her knees before the judgment stone, the same one where she had once bled in silence. "She comes like a ghost," the high priest said, voice quivering. "A witch of the forest. A sorceress who drums lies into your ears. She must confess." Zelina did not move. The chief pointed a trembling hand. "Speak, girl. If not with your mouth, then with your cursed drums. Confess what you are." Still, nothing. Then, Nor appeared. She stepped through the crowd like a shadow-splitting light. No one dared stop her. Her eyes burned with ancient knowing. She carried something, wrapped in bark cloth. She knelt beside Zelina, unwrapped it. The drum. Zelina's drum. She placed it before her. Their eyes met. Zelina touched the wood, closed her eyes, and began to play. The rhythm started low, like a memory surfacing from water. Then it built, faster, heavier, layered with meaning. Betrayal. Injustice. Fear. Pain. Her heartbeat pulsed through it. The ground beneath her vibrated. Villagers stopped breathing. The drum beats changed, and suddenly the rhythm wasn't hers alone. It mimicked voices, perfectly. The first beat was the chief's voice, low and hissing, "We'll blame the girl. No one will believe her." Gasp. Then the high priest, "Cut her tongue. If she can't speak, truth will die with her." A woman in the crowd screamed. Zelina's hands moved like fire now, her palms flying across the skin of the drum. Each beat mimicked another voice, another lie, land stolen, bribes taken, sacrifices falsified. The drum sang their secrets. And then, the wind rose. It howled through the trees like 1,000 wailing mothers. It twisted between the huts, tearing through masks and banners. It echoed the drum, but louder, clearer. Voices. So many voices. All of them real. The villagers clutched their ears, their hearts. Some fell to their knees. Others sobbed openly. The sound was not just heard, it was felt, crawling through bone, bursting through memory. Then, the drum slowed. Zelina struck a single note. And the wind, as if obeying her, stilled, and whispered, in the high priest's own trembling tone. Poison the air. Say it was the gods. I'll anoint the body with oil, they'll believe anything. The high priest shrieked, clutching his chest. He fell backward, convulsing. Foam bubbled at his mouth. He writhed, eyes rolling, as though choked by the very spirits he once claimed to control. No one moved to help him. When his body finally stilled, the square was silent. The chief stood shaking, mouth agape. This is trickery, he muttered. She's cursed. She's... A small child stepped forward, no older than 7, eyes wide with awe. She looked at Zelina, then turned to the chief. She's not singing, the child said softly. The spirits are. The crowd rippled. One woman began to chant a mourning song. Another fell to her knees in prayer. An old man dropped his staff and cried, We knew. We knew but said nothing. Zelina rose slowly, bloodied knees trembling, eyes sharp. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The drum did it for her, one final beat, then silence. The villagers watched as she turned away from the judgment stone and walked through the parted crowd. No one stopped her. Even the guards lowered their weapons. Some stepped aside, heads bowed. The wind followed her like a loyal dog, curling around her ankles, lifting her cloak. The chief sat heavily on his stool, broken. The high priest's body lay cold beside him. The council dissolved that day, no words, no votes. Just silence. But it was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence after a storm. And in that hush, everyone understood. They had brought her back to kill her again, but she had brought the wind to judge them all. Barika did not sleep that night. After the trial of echoes, the village lay shrouded in a stunned, aching silence. Not the oppressive kind that had once buried truth, but the silence that follows the cracking of something ancient and brittle. The kind of silence where nothing can pretend anymore. The high priest's body was left in the square. No one dared move it. The chief vanished into the shrine, locking himself inside with food and guards, praying to gods he had long stopped fearing. But the people, oh, the people, they changed. Women who had once lowered their eyes in meetings now stood in small clusters, speaking openly, hands trembling but no longer clenched in fear. Men stood beside them, quiet, ashamed, unsure whether to defend or denounce. The griots left their drums untouched, afraid to beat a sound that might offend the ear. Children whispered Zelina's name, not like a curse, but like a blessing. By morning, smoke rose from the forest trail. They came like mist, they echoed. Dozens of them, dressed in earth tones and wrapped in cloths stitched with bone patterns and old symbols, women of all ages, all silences. They moved with grace and fire, barefoot and calm, led by Zelina at the center. Her drum was strapped to her back. Her eyes were clear. Nor walked beside her, staff in hand, face painted with white ash. Around them, the forest seemed to lean in, vines curling downward, birds calling in strange rhythmic bursts. It was as if even nature prepared to listen. The echo passed through the village gates without resistance. No one stopped them. At the shrine's steps, they paused. It was an old structure, carved from sacred stone, wrapped in ironwood beams. A place meant for prayer, now desecrated by years of corruption and power hoarding. The chief had locked himself inside. His guards lined the walls, spears pointed, but their hands shook. Their ears still remembered the drumbeats from the night before. The truth had made them bleed inside. Zelina stepped forward. She unslung the drum and set it on the stone path. No ceremony. No speech. She sat on the earth, crossed her legs, and laid her hands on the hide. The first beat was soft, like a mother waking a sleeping child. Then stronger. Then steady. Each rhythm was a call, to memory, to loss, to justice. Badum. Badum ye. Badum. From within the shrine came a sudden sound, muffled, terrified screams. Then shouting. Then silence. The wind howled. Then came the mimicry, the wind echoing the chief's voice, crying out from behind the shrine walls. But it wasn't just wind. The birds joined. The leaves shifted. The forest repeated his pleas. It wasn't me. I didn't know. I only wanted peace. But no one believed it anymore. Smoke began to rise. One of the echoed women poured oil along the shrine's base. Another lit a flame from her gourd. The shrine caught slowly, then all at once. The screams continued, now desperate, clawing. But the villagers stood still, watching as the place that had silenced their daughters turned into ashen sky. Zelina's drum didn't stop. Even as the shrine cracked and collapsed, even as the flames swallowed stone, she drummed, her rhythm unbroken, calm, like a heartbeat that would not falter again. By sundown, nothing remained but scorched earth and smoldering beams. The chief's voice was never heard again. That night, the village gathered under the old talking tree, a place where stories were once shared, now reborn. The elders, shaken and weeping, stepped forward. "We have failed," one said. "We protected pride, not people. We silenced what should have guided us," said another. They turned to Zelina. She sat quietly beside her drum, hands resting on her knees, her face unreadable. One of the elders knelt before her. "We cannot return your voice. But we beg your forgiveness. And we ask, what should become of our laws?" Zelina looked around the crowd, the mothers who had buried daughters, the girls who had never been allowed to sing, the boys who had learned fear before fairness. Then she tapped her drum once, soft and slow. Nor stepped forward and spoke in her place, "Let every child learn to speak. Let every child learn to listen." The villagers murmured, then chanted, then agreed. A new law was born that night. No longer would words belong only to the powerful. Storytelling would not be a weapon, but a shared inheritance. Rhythm would belong to all. The next day, Zelina rose before dawn and walked alone to the center of the village. There, where the old judgment stones still stood, stained by years of fear and pain, she placed her drum. She did not chain it. She did not bless it. She simply left it. A gift. A warning. A new beginning. Children gathered around it hours later, drumming softly with their fingers, laughing, crying, telling stories with beats and breath. Zelina never spoke again, not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to. There were whispers nor could have healed her, could have given her voice through smoke and charm. But Zelina refused. The silence had become sacred now, not forced, but claimed. And besides, her rhythm lived in every home. In every fire. In every story whispered through walls. Her silence had shattered the old world. And when silence shatters, only the guilty bleed. The judgment stone was gone now. In its place stood a great circle of carved wooden seats, smooth from use and darkened by years of hands and rain. A tree grew in the center, not planted by any hand, they said, but sprung from the ashes of the old shrine the night after it burned. Its roots twisted through the ground like memory, and its leaves whispered when no wind blew. Children gathered there each sunset, wide-eyed and eager, clutching small hand drums carved from calabash, goat hide, or sacred wood. They sat cross-legged, waiting for the woman whose silence had once shaken their world. Zelina. She was older now, her hair laced with silver, her eyes sharper than ever. She wore the colors of earth and storm, and when she walked into the circle, the children quieted without a word. She carried no staff, no throne, no crown. Only the drum. The same one. The sacred one. Its skin was darker now, worn and oiled by decades of storytelling, but its rhythm remained as clear as river water. Zelina placed it in the center, tapped it once, and the forest leaned in. There were no spoken instructions. She had no tongue, and yet they understood her completely. She would drum a pattern, the beat of betrayal, the rhythm of forgiveness, the tempo of grief, and the children would mimic it, feel it, name it. Then, one by one, they would tell their stories through rhythm. A girl's anger at her father. A boy's guilt over a stolen trinket. A toddler's drumbeat of joy after finding his lost goat. They laughed, cried, and healed beneath that tree. And Zelina listened. Sometimes she tapped her fingers in encouragement. Other times, she simply nodded and touched her chest. "I hear you," her silence said. "The wind hears you too." Across the village, her presence echoed in every home. Families kept small drums by their hearths. Couples drummed rhythms of apology. Neighbors settled disputes through truth beats. No more judgment stones. No more forced silences. Justice came through sound now, through feeling. But Barika was only the beginning. The echoed women, once thought cursed, became legends. They traveled from village to village, carrying their truth drums on their backs. They entered places where girls were still silenced, where councilmen still ruled by fear, and where old laws were yet to be broken. They didn't speak. They drummed. And where they drummed, secrets broke open. One village awoke to find its chief missing and the truth of a stolen river revealed in rhythm. Another repented for sacrificing twins after an echoed woman drummed the cries of lost mothers beneath the moon. Some feared them. Others welcomed them. But none could ignore the truths their drums carried. And at the heart of it all was the legend of Zelina. Her story was taught to children alongside ancestral tales, not as myth, but as memory. Teachers would say, "Once, there was a girl whose voice could mimic the birds. But when they took her tongue, she learned to sing through the earth." Her name became a proverb. Even silence can sing. On the windier nights, elders claimed you could still hear her drum echo through the forest. They said it beat on its own when lies were told. That it throbbed like a heart when someone tried to bury the truth. One night, a visiting griot from a distant land stood beneath the sacred tree. He had come to see for himself if the stories were true. When the wind picked up and he heard the faint rhythm, not human, not animal, but something older, he fell to his knees. "I lied to my wife," he whispered to the wind. "I took what was not mine. I blamed the servant girl." The wind hushed. Then came a beat, 4 strikes, a pause, then one loud thump. The griot wept openly. "I will return it," he promised. "I will confess." No one saw who had drummed. Zelina hadn't moved. Her eyes were closed. The children watched in awe. She rose the next morning and walked alone to the edge of the village, where the land met the sky. She knelt and placed her hand on the ground. The drum did not move. But the earth answered. And somewhere, far beyond, another echoed woman lifted her own drum and played a rhythm no one dared silence. Zelina never spoke again. She never needed to. She had done what no curse, no blade, no man could undo. She made silence into a weapon of truth, a cradle of justice, a voice that outlived time. And so, when children of Barika misbehaved or lied, their parents didn't raise voices. They only said, "Be careful. Zelina's listening." And the wind, like always, whispered back,